She was only 8 years old, but in that moment, Lily understood what it meant for your heart to break. It wasn't a feeling you got from a scraped knee or a lost toy. It was a cold, sharp crack deep inside your chest, a shattering that happened when you saw the people who were supposed to be your neighbors circling your mother like wolves, their words like claws, tearing her apart. And as she watched her mama's shoulders slump, as she saw the last flicker of fight leave her eyes, Lily knew she couldn't just stand there. She had to do something. She had to find someone, anyone, who wasn't afraid. So she ran. She ran past the fence, past the broken gate, and down the dusty road toward the one place her mother had always told her to avoid. The roadside bar where the bikers gathered. If you've ever felt that surge of desperation, that need to protect someone you love no matter the cost, then you understand the storm inside this little girl. Stories like this are why we do what we do. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We uncover the moments where ordinary lives turn into legends. Welcome back. The town of Cedar Creek was the kind of place that looked peaceful on a postcard, but hid its scars beneath a thin veneer of fresh paint and forced smiles. Lily and her mother, Sarah, lived in a small, rented clapboard house on the outskirts, a house that had seen better days much like its occupants. Sarah was a widow, her husband, a kind-hearted mechanic named Jack, lost to a flash flood 2 years prior while trying to help a stranded motorist. His death didn't just take a husband and father, it took their stability, their joy, and the town's fleeting respect. Now, Sarah worked 2 jobs, waitressing at the diner during the day and cleaning offices at night, to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. She was a ghost of her former self, her laughter a distant memory, her eyes holding a permanent shadow of exhaustion. But to Lily, she was everything. She was the warm arms that held her after a nightmare, the voice that still tried to sing lullabies even when it was hoarse with fatigue. Lily saw the struggle, she saw the weight, and she loved her mother with a ferocity that was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Their problem had a name: Brenda, their next-door neighbor. Brenda was the self-appointed queen of their little cul-de-sac, a woman whose life's purpose seemed to be the meticulous curation of her perfect lawn and the systematic destruction of anyone who didn't fit her narrow definition of acceptable. Sarah's struggling garden, the peeling paint on their shutters, the old sedan that sometimes didn't start. It was all fuel for Brenda's contempt. She saw Sarah's grief not as a tragedy to be sympathized with, but as a weakness to be exploited. It started with snide comments muttered just loud enough to be heard over the fence. Then it escalated to anonymous complaints to the landlord about the unsightly property bringing down the neighborhood's value. But that afternoon it had reached a fever pitch. Brenda and 2 of her cronies, women cut from the same bitter cloth, had cornered Sarah by her own mailbox. Lily was playing in the yard when she heard it. "Just a suggestion, Sarah." Brenda's voice was syrupy with fake concern. "But if you can't manage to keep the place up, perhaps it's time to consider Al's smaller living situation. A trailer park, maybe? I hear they're quite affordable." One of the other women, Carol, chimed in. "It's the least you could do for the community. We all work hard to maintain a certain standard. It's a shame your situation is causing such a blight." Sarah's voice was barely a whisper, a plea. "Please, Brenda, I'm doing my best. I just need a little more time." Brenda laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Honey, time is a luxury, one you clearly can't afford. Look at you. You look like you slept in those clothes. And that child, always so quiet. It's not normal. People are talking." That's when Lily saw it. The final blow. It wasn't the words about the house or the yard. It was the words about her. She saw her mother flinch as if she'd been struck. Sarah's face, already pale from exhaustion, went ashen. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The last vestige of her dignity was being stripped away in her own front yard, and she was too tired, too broken, to fight back. That was the crack in Lily's heart. That was the moment. Without a second thought, Lily turned and ran. She didn't run into the house. She didn't run to her room to cry. She bolted out of the gate and onto the main road, her small legs pumping, tears streaming down her face, blurring the world into a smear of green and gray. Her mother's old warning echoed in her mind. "Stay away from the rusty nail, baby. That's no place for a little girl." It was the biker bar on the edge of town, a place of rumbling engines, loud music, and men with leather vests and long beards who looked like giants from a storybook. But today, the storybook giants were her only hope. The run was a blur of panic and determination. The hot asphalt burned through her sneakers. A car honked, swerving to avoid her. She didn't stop. She could see it up ahead, a low, sprawling building with a flickering neon sign of a crooked nail. Dozens of motorcycles were parked in chaotic rows outside, gleaming beasts of chrome and black steel. The air vibrated with the deep, guttural rumble of idling engines and the thrum of classic rock music. She skidded to a halt at the edge of the gravel parking lot, her courage suddenly faltering. The men were enormous. They were covered in tattoos. Their voices were loud and rough. They wore vests covered in patches with skulls and eagles and names like Savage Saints and Reaper. One man with a beard that reached his chest and arms thick with muscle and ink was leaning against a massive Harley, laughing at something another biker had said. He looked like a mountain, a terrifying, formidable mountain. Lily stood frozen, her breath catching in little sobs. This was a mistake. They were scarier than Brenda. But then she pictured her mother's face, the utter defeat in her eyes. She thought of the word, blight. She swallowed a hard lump in her throat, wiped her muddy tears on her sleeve, and walked forward. She went straight to the biggest one, the mountain of a man. She tugged on the leather of his vest. The music seemed to die down as conversations halted. A dozen pairs of hardened, experienced eyes turned to look at the tiny, trembling girl standing amidst their pack. The mountain man looked down, his bushy eyebrows furrowed in surprise and annoyance. "What in the hell?" he grumbled, his voice a low rumble deeper than his bike's engine. "Kid, you lost. This ain't a playground." Lily looked up, her small face tilted all the way back to meet his gaze. Her voice, when it came, was a tiny broken whisper, but in the sudden quiet it carried like a gunshot. "Police," she squeaked, fresh tears welling up. "They were bullying my mama." The words hung in the air. The biker's expression shifted. The annoyance melted away, replaced by a slow burning, dangerous curiosity. He knelt down, his knees cracking, bringing his face level with hers. He smelled of leather, gasoline, and cigar smoke. "Who's bullying your mama, little bit?" he asked, his voice softer now but no less intense. "The ladies next door," Lily cried, the story tumbling out in a rush. "They're always so mean. They said our house is a blight. They said Mama looks like she sleeps in her clothes. And they said I wasn't normal. Mama was crying and she couldn't make them stop." "Please, can you help? You look like you aren't scared of anything." The biker, whose name was Beer, stared at this child. He saw the absolute, desperate faith in her eyes. She hadn't run to the police. She hadn't run to a teacher. She had run to them. To the outlaws, the rejects, the men society was scared of, because she needed someone who wasn't scared. In that moment, something long dormant stirred in Bear's chest. A code. A purpose. He looked over at his fellow bikers. He made eye contact with his president, a man named Ghost who had a sharp, intelligent face and eyes that missed nothing. A silent conversation passed between them. Ghost gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Bear looked back at Lily. "Show us." What happened next was a sight that would be seared into the memory of Cedar Creek forever. Bear stood up and swung Lily onto his broad shoulders as if she weighed nothing. He mounted his Harley, one by one. The other bikers, 15 of them, mounted their own machines. They weren't a gang in that moment, they were a cavalry. Bear fired up his engine. A deafening roar split the afternoon air, then another, and another. Soon, the entire parking lot was a thunderous symphony of raw power. The convoy pulled out onto the main road, a rolling wall of leather and steel, with a little girl with pigtails riding proudly on the lead bike, pointing the way home. Back in the cold D-sack, the scene was still unfolding. Brenda was now in full gloat, her arms crossed, a smug smile on her face as Sarah silently picked up a mangled geranium plant that had been, accidentally, knocked over. "Really, Sarah, it's for the best," Brenda said. "Some people just aren't meant for certain neighborhoods." That's when they heard it. A low, growing rumble in the distance. It started as a vibration in the pavement, then grew into an unmistakable earth-shaking roar. The three women looked up, their smug expressions faltering. The roar grew louder, closer, until it was deafening. And then they turned the corner. A line of motorcycles, gleaming and monstrous, rolled slowly, deliberately into their quiet little street. The bikers cut their engines in a synchronized, chilling sequence. Vroom, 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 one after another until an eerie, heavy silence fell, broken only by the tink, tink of cooling metal. Brenda Carroll and the other woman stood paralyzed, their mouths agape. These men were the antithesis of everything their manicured world represented. They were chaos and anarchy made flesh. Bear gently lifted Lily from his shoulders and set her down. She immediately ran to her mother, who was staring in stunned disbelief, and clung to her legs. Ghost, the president, dismounted. He didn't look at the women. He walked over to Sarah, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel. He removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes that were surprisingly calm and assessing. "Mom," he said, his voice respectful. "We understand there's a situation here. This young lady," he gestured to Lily, "came to us for assistance." Sarah could only nod, her arms wrapped protectively around her daughter. It was then that Brenda found her voice, shrill and laced with a fear she tried to mask with bravado. "What is the meaning of this?"
"You can't park here. This is private property." "I'm calling the police."
She fumbled for her phone. One of the other bikers, a hulking man named Tiny, took a single step forward. He didn't say a word. He just crossed his massive arms over his chest and stared. Brenda's hand froze, the phone slipping from her trembling fingers and clattering to the pavement. Ghost finally turned his gaze to the three bullies. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. His voice was low, measured, and all the more terrifying for it. We're here to have a conversation about community. He began, pacing slowly in front of them like a predator assessing its prey. See, we have a code. We look out for our own. And it seems to us that this woman, he pointed a thumb at Sarah, and her brave little girl, are more a part of our community than they'll ever be a part of yours. He stopped and looked at Brenda's pristine, overly manicured lawn, then back at Sarah's struggling but loved little garden. You're worried about a blight, he continued. Funny, I see a widow trying her damnedest to raise her child. I see a little girl who has more courage in her pinky than you three have in your entire bodies. She ran through traffic to find help for her mother. What have you done today besides spit poison? Brenda tried to speak, but only a strangled squeak came out. Bear walked over and stood by the broken geranium. He picked up the pot, his large hands handling it with a surprising gentleness. Looks like this fell, he said, his voice a low growl. Shame. Then the bikers got to work. They didn't lift a finger against the women. They didn't have to. Their presence was the weapon and their actions were the lesson. While a few of them stood as a silent, imposing wall between the bullies and Sarah's family, the others got busy. One biker, who was a landscaper by trade, started expertly repotting the geranium and weeding Sarah's flower beds. Another, a mechanic, popped the hood of Sarah's sedan and started tinkering. Two others began carefully scraping the flaking paint from the shutters, prepping them for a fresh coat. They were reclaiming the territory. They were showing Brenda and her friends that their definition of value was worthless. Real value was strength. Real value was loyalty. Real value was a community that showed up, not one that shut people out. The neighbors had begun to emerge from their houses, drawn by the unbelievable spectacle. They watched in stunned silence. Some filmed on their phones. Others just watched, a few with shame on their faces for never having stepped in themselves. Ghost walked back over to Brenda. He leaned in close, and she flinched. Here's what's going to happen, he said. His voice barely a whisper, but it carried absolute authority. You are going to leave this family alone. Permanently. You are going to retract every complaint you've made to the landlord. You are going to smile and wave when you see them. You are going to be the best damn neighbor this street has ever seen. Because if we hear one whisper, one single, sore note of trouble coming from you. He paused, letting the threat hang in the air. We'll be back. And next time, we won't be bringing paintbrushes and gardening tools. Do you understand the terms of our Neighborhood Watch program? Brenda nodded frantically, her face a mask of pure, undiluted terror. Good, Ghost said. He turned to Sarah. Mom, you and your daughter are under the protection of the Savage Saints now. If anyone, and I mean anyone, gives you so much as a dirty look, you have Lily come find us. You're not alone anymore. Sarah finally broke. The tears she had been holding back for 2 years, through grief, through struggle, through humiliation, came in a torrential, healing flood. She sank to her knees in the grass, holding Lily tightly, sobbing tears of relief, of gratitude, of a burden finally being lifted. The bikers finished their tasks. The garden was tidy. The car, with a quick adjustment, purred to life with a healthy rumble. The shutters were prepped and a fresh can of paint was left on the porch with a note that read, "For a fresh start." Without another word, they mounted their bikes. Bear gave Lily a small, almost shy wave. She waved back, a huge, radiant smile on her face for the first time in years. One by one, the engines roared back to life. The sound was no longer menacing. It was a triumphant fanfare. They pulled away, the thunder of their departure a final, powerful message to the entire street. The bullies scurried into their houses, their reign of terror, Tudi Jesu. The story, of course, spread through Cedar Creek like wildfire. But it didn't cast Sarah and Lily as pariahs. It cast them as local legends. The quiet widow and her daughter who were protected by the most feared and respected men in the county. From that day on, Sarah's life changed. The landlord, having heard the story, fixed the leaking roof without being asked. People at the diner started leaving bigger tips. Neighbors who had once averted their eyes now stopped to chat and offer to watch Lily after school. It wasn't out of pity. It was out of a newfound, deeply ingrained respect. The bikers had redrawn the social map of the town. They had shown that true strength isn't in cruelty, but in protection. That family isn't always about blood, but about who shows up when your world is falling apart. Lily had been right. She had run to the people who weren't scared, and in doing so, she had taught an entire town the meaning of courage, and a group of hardened bikers the power of a little girl's love for her mother. That's the story of how a child's desperate act of love summoned an unlikely army and silenced the voices of hate. It's a reminder that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather vests and ride on 2 wheels. It makes you wonder, in your own life, who would you run to? And more importantly, would you be the person someone runs to when they have nowhere else to go? This story of community and unexpected protectors resonates differently depending on the landscape. It feels like it could have happened in a small town in the Midwest, or a dusty suburb in the Southwest, or a quiet neighborhood in the South. So, I have to ask you, from which part of the country are you watching this video? Let me know in the comments below.